well, an extremely volatile electorate on the red wall. And we asked the Conservative Party for a minister, but we're told none could come on the programme. However, I'm delighted to be joined by the Conservative candidate, Andrew Percy, and the Shadow Justice Secretary, Richard Burgon. Good evening to both of you. Richard Burgon, talking to people in Wakefield. This is natural and traditional Tory voters, Labour voters I've been talking to. But they don't see themselves as Conservatives, but they're going to vote Conservative this time, almost as a kind of protest Brexit vote.
Well, I didn't really see the package earlier, so I couldn't hear directly what they said, but I too have represented a Leave seat. That is the seat that I'm contesting the election in. And I think when you go onto the doorstep and ask people, what do you think the biggest political question is, they usually say Brexit. But when you ask them, what is most important to you and your family, they very rarely mention Brexit. They mention public services.
But they see Brexit as a key to some of this. And it's quite also interesting that you've got a situation where some people would say, well, actually, you know, you might get me back, but you might get me back as long as it's not Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, on the doorstep, when I've been knocking on doors in my own constituency, which, as I say, voted Leave, and elsewhere, I have been taken aback by the enthusiasm there's been. There is some persuasion still to do. The point of opinion polls is to shift them. The point of campaigning is to change people's opinions. I believe we can and will win. The reason being, people have been hit in the pockets by the Conservatives over the last 10 years. Real wages in real terms are still lower than they were 10 years ago. So I think people's minds will be concentrated upon Labour's plans to raise living standards and boost people's earnings.
And certainly, and we'll come on to some of the big spending that lies ahead if there is indeed a Labour government. But Andrew Percy, one of the big things, right across the board that was mentioned today in Wakefield was the complete lack of trust, that actually politicians of all stripes have lost trust.
I think that's true. I think, you know, if you talk to any member of the public at the moment, they say, you know, plague on all of your houses. But more than ever previous election, I think that's probably the case, but I think that's partly because of the behaviour of politicians in the last 2.5 years. I mean, I think Richard must be knocking on different doors to me, because I've been knocking in marginal seats like Scunthorpe and elsewhere, and all I meet are people who have voted Labour, voted Leave, and have figured out that the Labour MPs we've been sending down to London for years are not going to do what the people want to do on Brexit, which is to leave, which is what we voted for.
But when people
I'm hearing different things to Richard.
But when people in Wakefield talk about austerity, they talk about it knowing so much about it because, you know, there was 30% less spend because of austerity, because of the cuts. And it's the fourth most severe hit area in England. And they hear Boris Johnson talk, but they don't hear him say, I think austerity was awful, I think it did a lot of damage.
I think what most voters understand when you talk to them actually is that, you know, they understand the mess we were in when we took over in 2010. People do understand that.
But they feel they're still in a mess because they're still going to feed food banks.
Actually, what we do have at the moment is we've got real wage growth at the fastest rate for 10 years, and that is starting to filter through, and I get that from my own constituents. But what they also understand is that you can't come up with a fantasy manifesto with billions of pounds of unfunded spending and expect that's not going to have an impact on people, because it will. It'll have an impact in more debt, which has to be paid back. It'll have an impact in higher taxes on ordinary workers.
We'll talk about fantasies in the manifesto in a moment. But Richard Burgon, just coming back to you on this, there is a sense that, and you saw it happen in Scotland, where Labour took the people for granted and were virtually almost wiped out in Scotland. There is a danger that you are going to lose a swathe of seats on the so-called red wall because you have taken voters for granted.
This Labour Party will never take people for granted, and the reason that that's the case and the reason that we show this is through our transformative manifesto. When we talk about boosting people's earnings, when we talk about real positive change, when we talk about saving the average family over £6,000 a year, when we talk about a national minimum wage, this election is about far more than Brexit.
Can I just
now we're on to deliver what the people in the north of England voted for. You will not vote for it. None of you have. You all stood on the same promise I stood on in 2017 to deliver Brexit, and you have taken people for granted. That's all I hear in this election.
But then we can also say,
Leave, and these people won't deliver it because they're not going to, Kirsty.
We're going to talk a bit about manifesto. You could also say, is Boris Johnson taking people for a ride? Get Brexit done is his slogan. He may not be able to get Brexit done by the 31st of January.
We're going to leave on the 31st of January because we have that deal all ready to go. So we can absolutely. Well, and the reason we couldn't make good on that promise was because people like you trudged through the lobbies in Parliament to stop us leaving.
Well, let's just talk about manifestos now.
Okay.
You talk about, you know, the offer that Labour is offering. Labour is offering massive more money for the NHS, education, teachers, class sizes, free broadband to every house, no tuition fees, 58 billion for WASPy women. You're offering it all, but the problem is when I talk to people in Wakefield, it's not that they think these are bad things. What they say is they don't think that Jeremy Corbyn could ever deliver that.
Well, I obviously speak to people day in, day out in my constituency and elsewhere, and people know they deserve better than a decade of Lib Dem austerity. I think that Andrew and others will find out that people in the north, whether they voted Leave or Remain, see through this Prime Minister. They know that Boris Johnson, despite his clown act, despises working class people. They've heard what he said about people from Liverpool. They've heard what he said about black people. They've heard what he said about working class men. They've heard what he said about single mothers. And the judgment will be passed. On the 12th of December, the idea that it's a Brexit election is completely wrong. It's about living standards, it's about public services.
Traditional Labour voters in Wakefield today said it was a Brexit election. This is the electorate. The whole point is the politicians are meant to listen to the electorate.
People have different views.
Andrew Percy.
And Richard, you've got to stop going around. We have all this problem with politics at the moment in which we have people saying all politicians do is argue the whole time and throw insults at each other, right? So you can't go around saying that that your political opponents despise people.
Okay.
I don't despise. I'm a working class lad. I don't despise the working class.
Andrew Percy,
You've got to stop saying this stuff. You have to stop saying it. It's dangerous for democracy.
Andrew Percy, can I just take you through you talk about not despising people. Therefore, you respect the electorate. So therefore, you tell the electorate the truth, and you tell the electorate what is actually going to happen if there is a Conservative government. So, what Boris Johnson says, he promises 20,000 more police officers. He doesn't say those are the ones that are being brought back since the cuts in 2010, nor does he say with a bigger population it'll actually still be 8% short of what it was. He promises 15,000 new nurses. We now know that includes 19,000 already there. Finally, on this one, he promises 40 new hospitals. Only 6 will be built by 2024. He is promising what he can't deliver, and he knows he can't deliver, and he knows isn't true.
Well, I don't accept that. I mean, it's simply not the case to say we haven't started to recruit the 20,000 officers. There are 20,000 more officers coming.
40 new hospitals.
We've started to recruit the first 2,000 of those. I think I had the figures for my area only a few weeks ago. So that is happening, and we will recruit more nurses. Now, of course, we all know what happened with police funding, and we all know what's had to happen in the last few years to bring the economy back into an even keel. So we're not in a situation where we're mortgaging the future of every young person in this country by saddling with more debt, which of course is this fantasy solution.
Can I just ask you finally on the question? You say it's not a Brexit election. For a lot of people, it is a Brexit election. When Jeremy Corbyn came to power, the words he actually used were, the big sell was, this is going to be about straight-talking, honest politics. But he is biting his tongue on the one issue, the biggest issue to face this country in one of the most important elections in many, many years. He's biting his tongue over Brexit, and people see through that.
Not at all. The Tories have created many crises. Brexit is one of them. But in relation to the Brexit crisis the Conservatives created, Jeremy is actually bringing people together by saying that there will be a vote so that people can have a final say between a credible Leave option that doesn't destroy the economy and workers' rights and Remain. And whatever the outcome of that result, people have Jeremy Corbyn's word that as Prime Minister he will implement it. That will bring people together. Andrew offers division based upon Brexit and an electioneering on that. We will bring people together, end austerity and raise living standards.
Thank you both very much indeed.